Let's be honest for a moment. How many times have you promised yourself you'd go to sleep earlier, only to look at the clock and realize it's already past midnight again? One more video, one more scroll, one more distraction before the day finally ends, and then morning arrives like a punishment. Your alarm rings, your mind feels heavy, and before the day even begins, you already feel behind. Coffee helps a little, sure, but deep down you know something isn't right. The energy isn't there. The focus isn't there. And somehow life always feels just a step out of reach. Now here's the strange part most people never question. What if the real reason so many people feel stuck in life has nothing to do with talent, motivation, or opportunity? What if the problem begins every single night? In this story, you're going to follow the journey of a hard-working man whose life was slowly collapsing under constant exhaustion. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't unmotivated. He simply didn't realize that the habit destroying his future wasn't happening during the day. It was happening after midnight. But the moment he discovered the hidden power of protecting his nights, everything began to change. His mind, his energy, his work, and eventually his entire life. And the most surprising part, the transformation didn't require extreme discipline or complicated productivity systems. It started with one simple shift: the discipline of ending the day earlier. Stay with this story until the end, because what this man discovered about sleep, energy, and success might completely change the way you think about your own nights. Most people don't realize how quietly exhaustion takes over their lives. It doesn't arrive like a storm. Instead, it creeps in slowly, one late night here, one restless evening there, until tiredness becomes the background noise of everyday life. People push through it, telling themselves it's normal. After all, everyone seems busy, everyone seems tired, so it must just be the way life works. Night after night, the same pattern repeats itself. A person promises they'll go to bed earlier, yet somehow the hours slip away. Maybe it's scrolling through a phone, finishing just one more episode, or answering work messages long after the day should have ended. Time drifts quietly past midnight. Before they know it, sleep becomes something squeezed into whatever space is left. Morning arrives too soon. The alarm rings, and the body feels like it weighs twice as much as it should. The mind wakes up slowly, foggy and uncooperative, like an engine struggling to start on a cold morning. Coffee helps a little, sure, but it never quite restores the sharpness that good rest once provided. Throughout the day, the effects quietly accumulate. Focus slips during conversations. Small tasks feel heavier than they should. Decisions take longer. And strangely enough, the person begins to believe this dull, sluggish version of themselves is who they truly are. But here's the thing most people never stop to question. What if exhaustion isn't their personality? What if it's simply their sleep debt speaking? Over months and years, that quiet fatigue begins shaping the direction of life itself. Opportunities pass by because there's no energy to chase them. Ideas fade before they're ever acted upon. Dreams get postponed again and again, not because the person lacks ambition, but because they lack the fuel. And the modern world makes this even worse. Bright screens, endless entertainment, and constant notifications keep minds wired long after the sun has gone down. The night, which once belonged to rest, has slowly become another battlefield for attention. People often believe success demands sacrificing sleep. "I'll sleep later," they say with a tired smile. Yet what they rarely notice is that the very habit meant to help them get ahead might quietly be holding them back. Somewhere out there, countless hardworking people are giving everything they've got during the day, while unknowingly sabotaging themselves every night. And among those people is one man whose life has slowly been drained by the same invisible problem. A man who works hard, tries his best, and yet wakes up every single day feeling like he's already one step behind. But his story is just beginning. The man at the center of this story wasn't lazy. In fact, if you asked anyone who knew him, they'd probably say the opposite. He worked hard, showed up on time, and carried the quiet pride of someone trying to build a better life. From the outside, he looked responsible, but behind his tired eyes, something wasn't quite right. Every morning started the same way. The alarm rang, and he reached for it with slow, reluctant movements, as if the day had arrived before his body was ready to face it. His room was still dark, the air heavy with the feeling of unfinished rest. For a moment, he'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, already feeling behind. He'd drag himself out of bed, splash cold water on his face, and promise himself the same thing he had promised many times before. Tonight I'll sleep earlier. It sounded simple, reasonable even. Yet somehow, night after night, the promise kept slipping through his fingers. At work, he did his best to stay sharp. He listened carefully, followed instructions, and pushed himself to keep up with the pace around him. But there were moments when his mind felt wrapped in fog. Words from meetings blurred together. Ideas came slowly, and he couldn't help noticing how effortlessly others seemed to think and react. Sometimes he wondered if they were simply smarter. Maybe they were naturally more disciplined. Maybe they just had something he didn't. Those thoughts lingered quietly in his mind, growing stronger with each exhausting day. The truth, however, was hidden in plain sight. His body carried a constant weight, one that no one else could see. Late nights had slowly become normal in his life. Long after work ended, he stayed awake under glowing screens, telling himself he deserved a little time to unwind. At first, those nights felt harmless. A few extra hours of entertainment, a little distraction from stress. But over time, they turned into a silent trade, temporary comfort in exchange for tomorrow's energy. By midday, the consequences always appeared. His shoulders felt heavier, his patience grew thinner. Even simple tasks required effort that seemed disproportionate to their size. And slowly, a quiet fear began forming in his mind. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent. The fear that he might never become the capable, focused person he once believed he could be. What he didn't realize yet was that the problem wasn't his ambition, or his intelligence, or even his discipline. The real issue was hiding inside the rhythm of his nights. And before long, that hidden problem would begin revealing itself in ways he could no longer ignore. At first, the routine didn't seem dangerous. It simply felt normal. The man would come home after a long day, exhausted but restless at the same time. His body begged for rest, yet his mind searched for distraction, something to soften the weight of the day. So the evening stretched longer and longer. One video turned into another. A quick check of messages became an hour of scrolling. Sometimes he told himself he needed that time to relax, to feel like the day belonged to him again. But the clock never stopped moving. Midnight would quietly pass. Then 1 in the morning, occasionally even later. Each night he whispered the same promise to himself. Tomorrow I'll fix this. Yet tomorrow always seemed to arrive before he was ready. Morning routines became rushed and clumsy. He'd wake up already tired, already late, already fighting the heavy fog in his mind. Breakfast was quick, sometimes skipped entirely. The day began with urgency instead of clarity, and that feeling followed him everywhere. At work, his energy faded faster than he wanted to admit. Tasks that should have taken 20 minutes stretched into an hour. He'd read the same sentence twice, sometimes 3 times, before it made sense. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that his mind struggled to stay awake. By the afternoon, he often felt like he was running on empty. Conversations required effort. Decisions felt heavier than they should. His body was present, but his sharpness, that seemed to vanish somewhere between midnight and morning. Slowly, a quiet frustration began growing inside him. He wanted to improve his life. Truly he did. He had goals, ideas, and plans for a better future. But every time he tried to push forward, exhaustion pulled him back like an invisible chain. It's a strange kind of prison when you think about it. Nothing physically stops a person from moving forward. No locked doors, no barriers. Yet the simple lack of energy can quietly trap someone in the same life, day after day, month after month. And that's exactly where he found himself. Working hard, trying his best, yet somehow always feeling like progress belonged to another version of him, one that never quite showed up. What he didn't know was that this exhausting cycle was quietly building toward a moment he couldn't ignore anymore. A moment that would force him to see the true cost of the life he had been living. For a long time, the man believed he could keep managing things the way they were. Sure, he felt tired, but who didn't? Everyone around him looked busy, stressed, and half awake, so he convinced himself that exhaustion was simply the price of being an adult. But life has a strange way of revealing the truth when we least expect it. One ordinary morning, he arrived at work already drained. The night before had stretched later than usual, and sleep had been short and restless. His mind felt dull, like a room with dim lighting where nothing was quite clear. That day, a small but important task landed on his desk. Nothing dramatic, just a decision that required attention, careful thinking, and a clear mind. Under normal circumstances, he could have handled it easily. But that morning, his thoughts moved slowly. like gears struggling to turn. He reread the information once, then again. Still, something felt off. Trying to push through the fog, he made the call anyway. A quick decision, just to move things forward. At the time, it felt harmless, just another small choice in a long day of responsibilities. But hours later, the consequences appeared. A mistake had been made. Not catastrophic, but serious enough to cause problems for his team. Questions began circulating. Conversations grew tense. And suddenly, the weight of that small decision landed squarely on his shoulders. Standing there, listening to the discussion around him, he felt something deeper than embarrassment. He felt clarity. For the first time in a long while, he couldn't ignore the obvious truth staring back at him. This wasn't just a bad day. It wasn't bad luck, or stress, or pressure from work. It was exhaustion. The sleepless nights, the tired mornings, the foggy thinking. All of it had slowly built up to this moment, and now the cost was visible, undeniable, sitting right in front of him. That evening, as he walked home, the city lights seemed harsher than usual. His thoughts were quieter too, not defensive, not distracted, just honest. And a simple question began forming in his mind. What if the biggest obstacle in his life wasn't his job, his opportunities, or his abilities? What if it was the way he had been treating his nights all along? That night felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just unusually quiet inside his mind. After the events of the day, the man couldn't distract himself the way he normally did. The usual habits suddenly felt hollow, like background noise that no longer made sense. He sat alone in the soft glow of the room, staring at the clock on the wall, the same clock that had watched so many of his nights drift past midnight without resistance. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't asking how much more he could squeeze out of the day. Instead, he was asking a different question. What if I've been fighting the wrong battle? For years, he believed success demanded pushing harder, waking earlier, working longer, grinding through fatigue with sheer determination. But now he began to see something he had overlooked. Effort without energy wasn't strength. It was slow self-sabotage. He thought about the moment at work, the fog in his mind, the mistake that followed, and suddenly the pattern became painfully clear. The problem hadn't started that morning. It had started the night before, and the night before that, and dozens of nights before that. So instead of promising to work harder tomorrow, he made a decision that felt strangely unfamiliar, almost counterintuitive. Instead of attacking his days, he would start protecting his nights. No grand plan, no extreme discipline, just one simple commitment. He would treat sleep as something important instead of something optional. That meant turning off the screens earlier, closing the day before midnight swallowed it whole, giving his mind permission to slow down before bed instead of feeding it endless stimulation. It sounded simple on paper, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't be easy, because late nights had become more than a habit. They had become a comfort, a way to escape the pressure of the day. And breaking that pattern would mean confronting the quiet moments he had been avoiding. Still, something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't trying to squeeze more effort out of an exhausted life. He was preparing to rebuild the foundation underneath it. What he didn't know yet was that a simple discovery was about to change the way he understood sleep, discipline, and performance forever. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too Bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. A few days after making that quiet decision, the man stumbled across an idea that stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't flashy advice or a motivational speech shouting about hustle. In fact, it was almost the opposite. Someone explained a simple principle that most people overlook. Sleep is not lost time. It's preparation. At first, that idea sounded strange to him. For years he had treated sleep like a pause button, something that delayed progress. The sooner he finished sleeping, the sooner he could start achieving. But the more he listened, the more something inside him clicked. The explanation was simple but powerful. The brain doesn't just shut down during sleep. It organizes memories, repairs the body, restores focus, and resets emotional balance. In other words, the hours spent resting quietly build the energy needed to perform when the sun rises. He started noticing examples everywhere. The sharpest people at work seemed calm and focused early in the morning. Athletes talked about recovery as seriously as training. Even successful leaders often protected their sleep like it was part of their job. And suddenly he saw the contradiction in his own life. He had been demanding peak performance from a mind that never fully recovered. It was like expecting a phone battery to last all day while charging it for only a few minutes at night. Once that realization landed, something shifted inside him again. Instead of viewing sleep as an obstacle to productivity, he began seeing it as the foundation of it. Discipline wasn't just about waking up early or working harder. It also meant knowing when to stop, when to close the day, when to recharge. That insight felt almost like meeting a mentor, not a person standing in front of him, but a principle guiding him toward a smarter way of living. A reminder that strength doesn't come only from effort, it also comes from recovery. Of course, understanding something is one thing. Living it, that's another challenge entirely. Because now he had the knowledge, he had the intention, but turning that idea into a real routine would require something he had never truly built before, a system. And that's exactly what he would try to create next. Understanding the value of sleep was one thing. Turning that understanding into a daily habit was something else entirely. The man knew that good intentions alone wouldn't change years of late-night routines. If he wanted real change, he needed structure. So he decided to build a simple system, not something complicated or extreme. Just a few small rules that would guide his evenings the same way work schedules guide a day. The goal wasn't perfection, it was consistency. The first rule was clear, a fixed time to end the day. Instead of letting the night stretch endlessly, he chose a specific hour when everything would begin slowing down. Screens would dim, work would stop, and the message to his mind would be simple: the day is complete. It felt strange at first. For years his evenings had been open-ended, drifting wherever distractions pulled them. Now he was creating a gentle boundary around his time, not to restrict himself, but to protect his energy for tomorrow. The second rule was something surprisingly powerful: a calm evening routine. About 30 minutes before bed, he began doing small things that signaled rest. Sometimes he read a few pages of a book. Other nights he wrote down thoughts from the day so his mind didn't carry them into the night. Occasionally he just sat quietly and let the pace of his breathing slow. These simple moments became a bridge between the noise of the day and the silence of sleep. The third rule was even simpler: consistency. He aimed to sleep and wake at roughly the same time every day. Even on weekends, he tried to avoid completely breaking the rhythm. The body, he learned, loves patterns more than occasional bursts of discipline. Little by little, the system began shaping his evenings. Instead of collapsing into bed after hours of distraction, he started arriving there intentionally. His nights felt calmer, his mind felt less chaotic, and although the changes were subtle at first, something important had begun shifting. Of course, building a new routine rarely feels comfortable in the beginning, because habits don't disappear quietly. They pull back, they tempt, they whisper that the old way was easier. And very soon, the man would feel exactly how strong those old habits still were. The first nights of change were far from smooth. In fact, they felt strangely uncomfortable, like wearing a new pair of shoes that hadn't yet molded to his steps. The man had expected discipline to feel empowering right away. Instead, it felt awkward. When the evening routine began, his mind resisted. Around the hour he had chosen to wind down, the old habits appeared like familiar voices calling him back. Just one more video, just a few more minutes online. You can start tomorrow instead. Those whispers sounded reasonable. After all, he had followed them for years. They were comfortable, predictable, easy, and sitting quietly in a dim room felt unfamiliar compared to the constant stimulation he used to enjoy. Some nights, the silence felt almost too loud. Without endless distractions filling the space, his mind began replaying thoughts from the day, conversations, mistakes, unfinished tasks. At first, it seemed easier to escape back into the glowing screens, and a few times, he almost did. But then he remembered the moment at work, the fog in his head, the realization that exhaustion had been quietly controlling his life. That memory became an anchor pulling him back toward the new path. So he stayed with the routine. He closed the laptop, turned off the lights earlier than usual, sat in the quiet, even when it felt strange. And night after night, he reminded himself that change rarely feels natural in the beginning. Habits are like rivers carved through the mind. For years, his nights had flowed down the same path. Now he was slowly redirecting that current, and the resistance was simply the water pushing against a new direction. A few practical tricks helped him along the way. He placed his phone farther from the bed so it wouldn't tempt him. He dimmed the lights an hour before sleep to signal calm to his body. And when his mind felt restless, he wrote down tomorrow's tasks on paper so his thoughts could finally settle. The victories were small. Some nights he still struggled to fall asleep quickly. Other nights he woke up wondering if this effort would truly make a difference. But deep down, something inside him sensed that a quiet shift had already begun. What he didn't realize yet was that the real reward of these changes wouldn't appear at night. It would reveal itself slowly, in the mornings that were about to feel very different. At first, the changes were almost invisible. The man didn't wake up one morning suddenly transformed, full of unstoppable energy. Life rarely works that way. Instead, the improvements appeared quietly, like the first light of dawn slowly replacing the darkness of night. One morning he noticed something unusual. The alarm rang, and he didn't feel like he had been dragged out of deep water. His eyes opened more naturally, his thoughts clearer than they had been in a long time. It wasn't dramatic, but it was different. For the first time in years, he stood up without immediately feeling the heavy fog that used to follow him everywhere. His body still felt calm, but his mind seemed more awake, like it had finally had enough time to reset during the night. That small difference changed the rhythm of the morning. Instead of rushing through the first hour of the day, he moved with more intention. Breakfast tasted better. Conversations felt easier. Even the simple act of planning the day felt less overwhelming. By mid-morning, another subtle change appeared. Normally, his energy would already begin fading, but this time, his attention held steady. Tasks that once felt exhausting were handled with surprising clarity. He noticed himself solving problems faster, responding more confidently. It was as if someone had quietly adjusted the brightness of his mind. Of course, the progress wasn't perfect. Some days were still slower than others. Occasionally, he stayed up later than planned and felt the difference the next morning. But that contrast became a powerful teacher. He could now feel the direct connection between the way he treated his nights and the way he experienced his days. Sleep was no longer an abstract idea. It was a visible force shaping his performance. Little by little, the man began trusting the process. He didn't need dramatic motivation anymore. The results themselves were enough. Clear mornings, sharper thinking, energy that lasted longer than a few cups of coffee. Each small improvement felt like a quiet reward for the discipline he had started building. And before long, those subtle changes would lead to something much more visible, a moment where others would finally notice the difference he had been slowly creating. One morning at work, something unexpected happened. It wasn't a dramatic event, just a moment that quietly revealed how much had changed. A complex problem appeared during a meeting, and the room filled with that familiar silence when no one immediately knows what to do. In the past, the man would have lowered his eyes and waited for someone else to speak, not because he lacked ideas, but because his tired mind rarely trusted itself fast enough. But this time, something felt different inside him. His thoughts were clear. As the conversation continued, pieces of the solution began forming in his mind almost effortlessly. He followed the details, connected the information, and suddenly, the answer felt obvious. Before doubt could interrupt him, he spoke. The room turned toward him, and for a brief moment he felt that old hesitation trying to creep in. But his mind stayed steady. He explained the idea step by step, calmly, clearly, without the confusion that used to cloud his thinking. And something interesting happened. People listened. A few heads nodded. Someone asked a question. Another colleague added to the idea, building on what he had said. Within minutes, the problem that had stalled the meeting began moving toward a solution. It wasn't applause or a standing ovation. Real life rarely works that way. But there was something better: respect. Later that day, a supervisor casually mentioned that his contribution had helped move things forward. It was a small comment, almost thrown into conversation, but it carried weight. Walking home that evening, the man replayed the moment in his mind. He realized the difference wasn't luck. It wasn't sudden intelligence or confidence appearing from nowhere. The real change had started quietly, night after night, in the hours he had chosen to protect. His mind had finally been given the rest it needed to work the way it was meant to, and that small victory revealed something powerful. If a simple habit could create this kind of change in a few weeks, then what might happen if he kept building on it? Weeks slowly turned into months, and the man began noticing something remarkable. The change that started with a simple decision about sleep was quietly reshaping his entire life. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily, like a tree growing stronger roots beneath the soil. His mornings became something he actually looked forward to. Instead of waking up already exhausted, he now started the day with a clear mind and stable energy. The first hour of the morning, once rushed and chaotic, became calm and intentional. Sometimes he reviewed his goals, sometimes he planned the day, and occasionally he just enjoyed the quiet clarity that came with real rest. That clarity followed him into the rest of the day. At work, tasks no longer felt like heavy obstacles. His thinking was sharper, his patience stronger, and his ability to focus had improved dramatically. Problems that once felt overwhelming were now challenges he could calmly work through. People around him began noticing the difference. Colleagues started asking for his input more often. Conversations with supervisors carried a new level of trust. Opportunities that once passed quietly by now seemed to appear more frequently in his path. But the transformation wasn't only professional. His evenings also changed in ways he hadn't expected. Instead of collapsing into endless distraction, he now had energy to do things that actually moved his life forward, learning new skills, exercising, reading, reflecting. The discipline of early nights had created something much bigger than sleep. It had created stability, and stability created momentum. Little by little, the tired man who once doubted himself began becoming someone different, someone focused, someone reliable, someone capable of building a future with intention instead of simply reacting to each day. Yet the most surprising part of the transformation was its simplicity. The turning point hadn't been a dramatic life hack or extreme productivity system. It had started with something many people overlook every single day, a quiet decision about how to end the night. And that realization carries a lesson far bigger than this man's story, a lesson that anyone watching might recognize in their own life. If you step back and look at the man's story, the lesson becomes almost surprising in its simplicity. His life didn't change because he suddenly discovered superhuman discipline. It didn't begin with a massive opportunity or a dramatic turning point. It started with something quieter, a decision most people overlook every single night. For years, he believed success demanded pushing harder during the day, more effort, more hours, more sacrifice. That's what the world often celebrates after all, the image of relentless work and endless hustle. But his story revealed something different. True discipline sometimes begins where people least expect it, with rest. Think about it this way. A tired mind struggles to focus. A tired body struggles to persist. When exhaustion becomes normal, even the most ambitious goals begin to feel distant and heavy. But when the body is properly restored, something powerful happens. Clarity returns, patience grows, decisions become sharper, and suddenly the same person who once felt stuck begins moving forward with surprising momentum. Anyone watching this story can apply that lesson. Start with something simple tonight. Choose a clear time to end the day. Turn off the endless stream of distractions. Dim the lights. Slow your breathing, and allow your mind to prepare for real rest. It may feel unusual at first, just like it did for him, but small choices repeated consistently can reshape a life more than dramatic bursts of motivation ever could. Because sometimes the path toward a stronger future doesn't begin with working harder. Sometimes it begins with learning how to close the day with intention, so tomorrow can begin with strength. And if one tired man could rebuild his energy, clarity, and direction simply by protecting his nights, imagine what might be waiting on the other side of yours.